Welcome back to Streaming Media Connect 2025. I'm Steve Nathans Kelly, Editor-in-Chief of Streaming Media Magazine and the Chair of Streaming Media Connect. And it's my pleasure to welcome you back for our next panel, Deep Data, Leveraging Actionable Analytics to Optimize Live Streams. First, before we get started, we'll go through a few housekeeping notes as we always do. The first person to name the music that you are hearing as we join the session today and correctly identify the track and the artist will win a $50 gift card from Amazon at the end of the session, but you must be present to win. So stick around to win that and also to hear a great conversation that we're about to enjoy. So the chat is open. So as always, please chat amongst yourselves in the chat. And then toward the end of the session, we'll also take Q&A from the audience. So place your questions in the Q&A and our moderator, Rob, will get to as many as he can. Sessions from all 3 days of Streaming Media Connect are already appearing on the Streaming Media YouTube channel. The link to that is in the chat. And we will be back live and in person October 6th to 8th in Santa Monica with our incomparable conference chair, the one and only Andy Beach. The full program is live now, and you can read all about it and register by following the links that Bill is putting in the chat. The call for speakers is also open. So although much of the content of the conference is pretty well set at this point, let us know what you want to speak about and what your area of expertise is. There's lots of speaking slots still open, so we'll do our best to find a place for you in the program. Without further ado, I would like to welcome back to the stage Rob Dillon of Rob Dillon Media Ventures. Welcome back, Rob.
Hey, Steve, thank you. I'd like to welcome you all out here. Most of us, it's after lunch. I hope you enjoyed your frozen burrito like I did. But we're moving on. We got another panel today. This one is about analytics in live streaming. We're all used to, and we've done for many years, the analytics for VOD, but now we got another level of complexity. So we'll be moving on to that. A little background about myself. I got a broadcast background, television, radio. Spent 6, 7 years with Tribune Broadcasting as the corporate digital director. Which basically a fancy way of saying I installed the live streaming VOD and OTT for 42 TV stations and a cable network, and for some odd reason, a radio station in there as well. Also got some stints with Cox and Sinclair in there. My last big gig was with a news startup out of Omaha called Straight Arrow News. I encourage you all to check them out. It's sand.com, where I installed the live streaming infrastructure and worked with the VOD and best practices. And also then for now, I'm doing independent consulting, really concentrated on AI and its place in live streaming. And I'm also a subject matter expert for the Streaming Video Technical Alliance. Now I'll allow the other two panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with Seb.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Seb Emin. I'm Vice President of Playback Experience at NBCUniversal, also working on Peacock. A little bit about me. I started my career at a UK-based company called Sky, which is now part of the Comcast NBCUniversal group, in 2014 as a software engineer. I worked on some streaming apps over in Europe across various devices and platforms until 2018, where I really started to laser focus on video playback and streaming, but still from a software engineering perspective. And that's really the domain that I've been in ever since. So I've been with Peacock since the very beginning, since we really started building it from the ground up, the very start of the journey, managing the engineering teams who built the video stack from nothing, working with various product and engineering teams to make sure that really from day one we had a feature-rich and stable platform, and it's really been the core objective for us from day one. And we're really starting to see the results of that now, with how successful that we've been in live streaming. In terms of what I do today, it's less software engineering and more focused now on our playback performance data and really supporting teams making decisions as we're building features and as we're monitoring these huge live events that we run, making real-time decisions and changing based on the data and what we're seeing with it. As I said, great to be here.
Thanks, Seb. Subhrendu.
Hi, glad to be here. I'm Subhrendu Sarkar, and am with Warner Brothers Discovery. I lead the Playback platform at Warner Brothers Discovery. We cover a lot of our D2C products, Science, HBO Max, Discovery Plus, Bleacher Report, soon to be CNN as well. Most of the stuff that we cover or my teams cover is the playback backend playback services, the playback platform, license delivery. So all that pretty much affects the playback experience, so to speak. And yeah, I've been with Warner Brothers Discovery since the merger, which happened 2 years back, or almost 3 years probably. Before that, I was with Honor Media on the HBO Max side. I've spent my entire career on video encoding, streaming. Previously was with Crunchyroll as well. So yeah, that's my background.
Excellent. And once again, welcome, gentlemen. And this should be a pretty good, interesting discussion. Let's start it from the top. Actually, like I said, I mentioned VOD, and we've all been dealing with that for hundreds of years now. But live streaming, as we know, is still complicated. Ignore my cat. I am. Live streaming is still complicated, and there's so much data we're collecting now. And compared to when I got started in live streaming, 10, 12, 13 years ago, there's so much more available to us. But what are still some of the most common metrics that we should be focusing on to improve real-time optimization? Start with Seb.
Sure, absolutely. So we have a few different groups of metrics. So I'll start with streaming stability, which for us is really paramount. So we've got our core video start failures, how many live streaming sessions fail to start at all. We have video playback failures, which is we might have succeeded with the initial playback, but for some reason the playback has been interrupted during the playback and stopped. And then we have rebuffering as well. So those are really our three core metrics that we're very laser focused on getting as low as is possible and as broadcast grade as possible. We then have streaming experience metrics. So things like the bit rate or the average bit rate, the video start time. I think people really underestimate how long the playback starting can impact the user's decision. And you definitely have your diehard fans who are going to watch no matter what, but there is absolutely a demographic of users that try it out, and if it's taking too long, they'll go and do something else. So this is something that we're also really laser focused on. In regards to live streaming specifically, something that's become a really big topic for us is latency, and in particular, how close to the live edge and to the actual action are you? It's an interesting one because it's a sliding scale. You have to balance providing the best possible experience, obviously being as close as possible, but also accepting that some network conditions and some environments that users are watching in are not suitable for that, and you don't want someone to compromise on the quality that we're giving them just to make them closer to the live edge. So that's something that we really keep track of. And then final couple, 4K and HDR uptake. It's something that we've really put a lot of time and effort into. And so we're always tracking the usage of 4K and HDR versus regular 1080p or SDR streams. And again, in particular, regard with live streaming, the latency of the data itself. It's great having all of this stuff and knowing that we have a spike somewhere and sessions are starting to fail. If you don't find out about that until 15, 20 minutes later, that's just too late. It's had too much of an impact on too many users. So I'd say those are our core ones. Happy to expand on that more. But I think collecting all of those really gives you a good perspective on streaming performance metrics.
Subhrendu?
Pretty much, I think Seb covered most of it or everything that's to cover. I'll add a few more, and I'll give some perspective of when we look at live streaming. There's a lot of focus generally on looking at live streaming as like the thundering herd traffic because everybody joins a live streaming event at a very specific time, and so for us, we we basically focus heavily on the infra and scalability aspects of the backend services, so that we do not like fall off when thundering events happen. The good thing about like HBO Max and historically the VOD assets that HBO Max supported, uh, we always had like premier events which always had that same characteristic of Thundering Herd. So we had dealt the challenges of Thundering Herd with VOD assets as well. So some of that like we can carry over to our experiences for the live, but that is only to the extent of the delivery aspects of it. The entire live ingest pipelines are generally very independent from the VOD ingest pipelines. So a couple of things on the ingest pipelines that we monitor effectively is things like uh, if there are errors happening in the ingestion pipeline. So things like dropped frames, audio issues, so sync issues, etc., etc. So and that is in the ingestion pipeline there's transcoding and then a bunch of transformations happening on that side, so we have metrics and monitoring on that side as well, aside from the playback experience side as only. uh, and then there are other aspects of live streaming which I think key aspects for us we need to take care of. There are some very business specific errors that happen that pop up in our metrics, things like we have specific features to say the geo block and maybe the event hasn't yet started, and those will also pop up as actual metrics of VPFs or start failures. So we have mechanisms to also ignore the false uh, negatives, so to speak. So those are things we generally keep an eye out in our monitoring of the live streams.
One thing I wanted to touch on there, Seb brought up latency, and latency has been the bane of our existence since I've been in the industry, to the extent that I have been on probably 10 different panels about latency. And we thought we got the happy medium, as Seb was saying, between business user, where we can make the justification, and then the proliferation, boy, that's easy for me to say, of sports betting has seemed to reignite that fire of getting it even closer to the live edge, as you said. I mean, I can remember 10 years back sitting in a chief engineer's office, and he had a TV that was on antenna, TV next to it was on cable, and TV on it was our live streaming, and having to explain to him the difference between the three and why live streaming was so much farther behind. I assume you guys see that this has taken on a new importance again as well, compared to, like I said, 5 years ago, we thought we had it, right before the plague hit. And we've obviously proven we didn't. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I'm happy to jump in there. I think, to your point, as demand for live sports grows and as more people are using streaming services for live sports, as we're hosting more events on streaming services, we had our NFL wildcard exclusive playoff in January 24. As the demand increases, so does the expectation. And so that's why we've been really laser focused on trying to make optimizations wherever possible. But the key thing for us is to make sure that we don't compromise on the quality to do that. And we will always go as far as we possibly can without ruining the experience for anyone. And we don't want to introduce, a whole lot of rebuffering. That's very, very important to us. But yes, it's an ongoing topic for us here.
Thoughts, Andrew?
Yeah, so I'm the end-to-end latency or glass-to-glass latency is always been important in different ways. Like, and as you initially mentioned, it's like a sliding scale. So what number is what number is good today will not be good tomorrow, so to speak, right? And also depends a lot on like the use cases and features and business products that we pile on top of the live streaming services. So examples being, if we pile on betting, things like betting, game betting, etc., then suddenly the latency numbers that would make sense otherwise will no longer make sense when we pile onto such products on top of it. Having said that, it is an active area of interest always. The key points I would want to make is, one of the key, like, historically I think there was always a comparison with broadcast and how much live streaming was lagging. With more and more households like moving only to OTT platforms, I think the comparison with broadcast goes down a little bit, so to speak. However, just purely on OTT streams, there is an existing challenge where if there is one person using maybe the same services upstairs and another person using the same services downstairs, they should not be too far apart, because otherwise it ruins the experience for both of them. So that is something we monitor, uh, or try to optimize for. And then the end-to-end latency is like an ongoing challenge as well.
So one thing was mentioned by both of you there, and is always fascinating, is monitoring the live streaming to look for hiccups. What are some of the more important KPIs you look for to forensically tell you, oh boy, there's an issue? I mean, there's the obvious problems, email, you're down. But what are some of the ones where you can proactively see it coming down the pipe? And what do those KPIs look like?
So I think from a Peacock perspective, this is where it's really important to just collect absolutely everything that's happening across every component. And that's how we've built everything with that in mind. So that if we start seeing spikes of rebuffering, we're actually able to drill down and see why that's happening. Again, it's great to be able to see that it's happening, but we need to be able to see, is it specific to a particular territory? Is it East Coast? Is it West Coast? Is it specific to a given internet service provider? And it's these things that allow us to move very quickly and to respond very quickly as well. It's really about that enrichment of data that allows us to do that.
I'll kind of I can only add to that is, the metrics is end to end, and we always look at like the playback experience metrics to begin with, VPF, VSFs. Those are metrics that are emitted from the players or clients, and we monitor them. As a overall end to end system, how we look at and how we have architected our system is having enough fallback options and fail open options, so that even if certain things are failing, the player always is not not stopping streaming, so there is always something that they can fall back on. The other things we monitor very closely for every live event and even for premium VOD events is we look at our CDN metrics very closely. So both in terms of monitoring where the pressure points are, how the pressure points are reacting, how the CDNs are getting affected on their capacity and so forth, and subsequently figuring out whether to load balance or not. And also there are other internal algorithmic ways of load balancing across CDNs that we leverage as well.
Yeah, I know a few years ago there was almost an entire cottage industry that was developing around CDN switching. So I realize that's still very important. I haven't had any of the solutions demoed for me lately, but I know they were even impressive back then. So they've got to be really good now. Excuse me, I lost my place. Oh, so both of you have commented on, I mean, you're just collecting massive amounts of data. And I know, Seb, you mentioned while we were talking before the panel that your team is responsible for bringing in all this data. How does that help your team to work smarter? And how do you then make sure that information gets to somebody who can use it?
Absolutely. And I always say having the data is really only part of it. A big part of working with this data is actually telling the story, right? And it's us as the experts who are looking at that data and actually telling people what that means. Too often in my career, I've seen just a table with numbers in it, which is really meaningless, honestly, unless you have that real domain knowledge. So people really look to us to provide that story. Like, do we really have a big issue here? I mean, the number looks alarming, but is it actually? And I think that's where the value of our teams really come in. So all of this data, the VSF, VPF, rebuffering, latency, etc., it's really about building the story behind that. I also think I just wanted to touch upon something Subhrendu was saying earlier about failovers and fallbacks, particularly in live streaming. It's so important that everything has a fallback and a plan B. And with big events that we run, we're testing months and months in advance, and literally every component going through it meticulously and having a plan B for if a specific component fails. Even the plan Bs have the plan B. So really, really important, really key. But apologize to go off on a bit of a tangent there. But yes, I think telling the story is a really important part of what we do.
Subhrendu, do you have anything to add to that? I'm sure you guys use the data. Somebody's collecting it for you and use it, but how do you use it within your team?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things I want to add is, so there are metrics and data points that like VSF, rebuffering ratios, bitrate, latencies, all of those we collect. Ultimately, that doesn't tell the full story by itself. So most importantly, what we want to tell the story is how it transforms into viewer engagement, or how it is affecting the playback experience, what quality of video they are seeing. Is it 4K, is it HDR? And so that is what we want to translate to. So then there is another set of data points we have is overall the viewer engagement, watch time, and other things that gets collected. And so marrying the two becomes important. I'll just want to also point out, while we marry the two, we need to be careful at looking at the data points and the feature sets that the product exposes. So I'll give you one example. So we very recently launched our multi-view experience with where we user can see multiple streams at the same time on the, and what we learned from that is the user engagement on those streams can look different from the single streams, particularly because many users maybe are using the multi-view as a first landing spot to figuring out which stream they want to get to. So the metrics for, or user engagement metrics for that kind of stream is kind of different from others. So while we are looking at the engagement metrics and tying them to the playback experience metrics, those are some business case use cases one needs to look out for and caveat them and look at them with those in that prism. The other aspect I will briefly touch upon is a lot of these data points that we collect both from playback metrics, CDN metrics, user engagement. There's another aspect we, and this is particularly because one of my teams looks at security and license delivery as well, is we need to look at not necessarily like pirates as such, but what are the anomalous behaviors in terms of traffic patterns we are seeing, and tying that to seeing whether they are actual user metrics, or are those like metrics coming from other sources, and how we can mitigate against those, because we don't want the streams to be pirated as well.
Really kind of, I'm sitting here harping on just the abundance of data you guys are getting, both from your team accumulating it, Subhrendu, your team using it. There's such a plethora, I like that term, such a plethora of data. How do you, your teams, and the people you're distributing this data to avoid what I've always called analysis paralysis, where you start chasing numbers? How do you keep concentrated on what is exactly what you need to be concentrated on?
I think for us, it comes back to the storytelling piece and the building the message, based on who is asking for the data and what specifically they're asking, we will provide something different. There'll never be a kind of one size fits all solution. If we are providing an update to an executive, for example, we know exactly what that person is looking for. And so we are the filter. Our team acts as the filter for that data to use your term of analysis paralysis. We don't fall down those pitfalls because we're working with the data every day. We know every single metric and what we would use a specific metric for in a given situation. And so we sort of take that responsibility from them so that we can literally just give them the information that they're looking for. And we find that to be highly effective as well. It works very well in our organization. We use it not only on live streaming and live monitoring of events, but also when we're building features. If we need to make decisions about how we build things, we use this data as well. And again, we fine tune what we provide based on the context.
Yeah, I'll add, like, with data, with so much data, I think another thing in the toolbox we need to have, and we have that, is how much we can slice and dice the data, and in how much dimensionality we can slice and dice the data. So basically drill down into very specifics of either a device and its capabilities, and then what its playback experience was, to basically figure out both how important it is and what the impact of it is in terms of that device either getting a 4K stream or not getting a 4K stream, or what is VSF and BPF or VST numbers look like. So that way of really not just looking at the overall metrics, but then really drilling down to very specific devices and their capabilities, and figuring out what the optimal numbers should be for those specific platforms becomes very important in really, like, telling the full story of the platform, and providing a experience which is optimal for each platform and every device.
Excellent. So as we're getting ready to transition to kind of a different area, this is a good way to do that. When it comes to streaming performance, and we've talked about all just the amounts of data and numbers that are coming towards you, how do your teams balance the data between technical aspects like bitrate and latency and user-centric metrics like engagement and satisfaction? How do you balance those needs? And I know, Seb, you'd mentioned that earlier when we were talking, but let's go a little more detail if we can.
Sure, absolutely. I really, really strongly believe that these go completely hand in hand, and I don't think it ever should be a balancing act, because quality ultimately drives engagement. If you have a stable platform, a feature-rich platform, users are going to stay and they're going to keep watching. If you experience constant dropouts and rebuffering and just simply a poor experience, you are much, much more likely to go and do something else because it's going to be very frustrating. So we don't separate technical from engagement, because they are one drives the other, and that's where we've put a lot of time and effort into looking at this data and then optimizing on a device by device level. We don't do a one size fits all. We will optimize for a given platform so that we can improve the metrics specifically on that platform, and that's how we've ended up where we are. And it's really through using that data and then using it to inform the decisions of what we build and what we work on to drive that experience.
I fully agree with Seb. I think the it has been historically and even today very challenging to actually link, like, the user engagement and say, with this bitrate increase actually led to better user engagement, yes or no, because there are a lot of other variables in the mixture, things like what is the content and whether how popular is that content by itself. And there had been past like presentations from, I remember 5 years back or 6 years back, YouTube made a presentation that depending on the content, a lower quality content will get equal or similar engagement as well. So it can be difficult to correlate, but what is encouraging for me is that I see that the better and better metrics is becoming more like table stakes for the industry. So that way it is like, it is not, at some point in the past, like, HD or full HD was not the table stakes, and then it became table stakes for everyone to really do 1080p always. And now I think 4K and HDRB is becoming more stable stakes these days. So I think we are just pushing the boundaries up and up and like making the user experience better and better. By that definition itself, it's like it defines the quality of the platform and the app in general, and which drives the overall engagement in the platform and how consumers consume the content.
Oh, go ahead.
Very well. I was just going to say I completely agree, and really just wanted to add that, I think between broadcast and streaming, from a user perspective, users generally have the same expectations in terms of quality, and I think that's completely fair enough. Why shouldn't they? But of course, to speak to some of what Subhrendu was talking about, streaming has far more variables and complexities. And when you're working in a broadcast environment, you can make some very safe assumptions about the sort of environment that user is watching in and the conditions under which they're watching. Streaming, you have all sorts of different bandwidths, you have all sorts of different devices, and I think people take that for granted a lot. And as a service, we need to still provide that living room experience that you would get on broadcast on a 65-inch TV in someone's living room. But similarly, we also have to provide a great experience to someone that's watching on their phone on a train going through a tunnel, right? And that's where the real complexity comes in. And I think that's overlooked a lot. But I think that's where these metrics marrying together becomes really important, especially with the uptick in usage in streaming over broadcast.
And let's stay with that. And how can you use the deep data, which that's the name of this session, deep data? How can you use the deep data to reveal the engagement patterns and preferences and dropout rates? And how do you use that to optimize content delivery?
Sure. Yeah. So we really do things on a device by device level, and it starts with collecting as much as possible so that we can actually make those decisions. Everything we do is data driven. And so, we're never just looking at a single dashboard that covers every single device on Peacock across the board. We're always looking at specific combinations. How is this specific device performing on live? How is this specific device performing on this specific event? And we pull all of our actions from that. We really build the case around it, and we obviously cherry pick where the experience needs to be improved, and we optimize really on a device by device level with all of the sort of preparation that we do for these big events. So it's really by having a data-rich platform, but then more importantly, extracting that data, because it's one thing to have the data, but you need to actually do that analysis, pull things out, and create actionable things that teams can then work on to make the platform more stable and reliable.
Andrew?
Yeah, so we have a lot of data, right? So, and there are two categories I'll differentiate that. One is which data is we can process real time, do an analysis, and have a feedback loop into the system to react in real time. So there is a category of data that we can do that. If we obviously can't both collect all the data in real time and process and analyze and feedback everything. And then there is a separate category for like more offline analysis to doing more platform-wide optimizations for like future events and future live streams. For the real-time ones, I think it's more important for things like CDN switching or finding out the best CDN. What are the issues happening in different regions? What are the specific devices that are possibly failing or showing some issues? So those are more real-time analysis. More offline and long-term analysis is more about figuring out how that impacted user engagement, or yes or no, how that affected things like your maybe piracy, maybe things like overall health of the platform. So those are more offline analysis to be done, or that's how we do it.
Excellent. Sticking with the user side for just one more question. And Seb, this was one of your points that came up, so I'll let you expand on it first. I'm not, picking on Subhrendu, but most of the questions are hitting you first, but there's only two of us. So, but this was one that you brought up, using telemetry to plan and anticipate viewer behavior and load, and what metrics help you do that? Obviously, tons of data, tons of user behavior, but how do you use it to project what you're going to need? Because that's obviously not a very exact science at this day and age.
Exactly, yeah, and that's why everything we do is very conservative. So, we'll do as much analysis we can on historical factors and what we know about upcoming events, but ultimately we're very conservative, and we will always make sure that the platform is ready for more than we think will actually arrive on the platform. I think it's very important, and I think it's the performance of the events that we've run a testament to that method and that methodology. And it's what we continue to do. We'll always use the data where we have it, but also be cautious and conservative to really make sure that we're never caught by surprise. In touch wood, we haven't been up to this point.
Yeah, I think the most of the things are the estimates are historical based as well as based on how much maybe our marketing team sees popularity of that in when they market stuff. So it's a combination of using historical data points or similar events or exact events and extrapolating that along with like inputs from different marketing and business sides to say forecast what the overall traffic volumes are expected. And then again, on that is on just what the expectation is. From the engineering side, we would take that as input to then like prepare for multiple x of that, and prepare how much will some of that will be pre-scaled and some much will auto scale on that day of the event, so or while the event is going on.
Okay. Moving on, we're all very familiar with A/B testing and adjust on the fly from back in the old days. Even a website and VOD. With live streaming is obviously by definition real time. Can you use A/B testing? Do you use A/B testing? And if you do, how do you use that to dynamically adjust on the fly the quality and content, whether it's ad delivery or viewer interaction or any of those other strategies?
Sure, yeah, happy to take this. In short, we A/B test everything all the time, constantly. We really do. It's part of our platform. I can give one specific example in terms of dynamically adjusting, particularly during live streaming. We're always monitoring the performance and health of our CDNs as we're streaming, and trying different things in different territories or based on different conditions, based on what we understand of sort of the lay of the land of those CDNs. In the moment that one of them start to underperform, instantly we will switch and we will start shaping the traffic a little bit differently to recover from whatever anomaly is happening in the wild. And that's something very real that we do, which I think is a great example of using A/B testing, but also just dynamically sort of changing and responding to degradation.
Yeah, I think CDN is a good example for A/B testing for live streams, particularly because live streams, at least like the options of actually doing A/B testing on the streams by themselves is less than compared to like VOD or even like overall in the platform. The parts where we do have more like different experiences that we enable for different platforms. I think that's one kind of A/B testing we do on our platform, because different platforms may have different features enabled or disabled accordingly, again based on the platform capabilities. For example, so that is one example. I'll give you simple example like multi-view, for example, right? Multi-view has very different device requirements as such, or device requirements can go up and down based on your architecture of how you implement it. And without going into the details of that, I think there are ways where we do A/B test on those for certain features like those.
Okay. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. We've touched on certain aspects of this question, but I'd kind of like to hear both of your opinions. You know, there's, even just looking in my office right now, I've got 4 or 5, maybe even 6 or 7 ways to consume live streaming. I got my TV, I got my Apple TV, NVIDIA, my phone, my tablet. What are the challenges of collecting and utilizing data like that and still trying to optimize? And I know, Seb, you had brought it up, the different devices. What are the challenges and how do you address those challenges for the multiple device platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is one of our biggest challenges. So I think first and foremost, in terms of collecting the data, is defining a really solid schema, something that is going to provide as much information as we have and never using the lowest common denominator. So on some platforms, there is some data that we cannot collect because the platform is not capable of providing that to us, or that API is not available to us. But that doesn't mean that we will stop all other devices from sending that. So we would rather get some information on some devices rather than be consistent. And that's really part of our strategy. So it's getting really everything that we can out of the device from a data collection perspective. But the real challenge is the streaming on those devices, because you have, again, without naming specific brands or models, there are specific devices which are built specifically for streaming and consuming streaming apps. There are others where it's more of a add-on and nice to have. And so, of course, they're not built with the same hardware. And that's a little bit about what I was speaking to before about the assumptions you can make about broadcast. You can't make those same assumptions with streaming and particularly with the very broad device set we have out there in the wild. And so we have to make decisions. And again, it's always about providing the best possible experience for that device and optimizing for that device. We would love for everyone to have 4K and HDR and all of the bells and whistles and amazing features that we've added to our live streaming, from HDR, 60 FPS, rewind, multi-view. But we target based on what we know the device can handle. And we will also, adjust based on network conditions as well. So it's always about that trade-off and providing the best possible experience for that user's environment, because we can't guarantee consistency like we can with broadcast.
Yeah, I completely agree with Seb. I think the 6 or 7 devices, Rob, you mentioned, I think in actual on the field, there is a lot more, and we discovered that specifically in certain markets where there's a long tail of devices which are out there, which we do not have them in our labs, for example, and it becomes even more difficult to know before, like, what its capabilities are or will be. So we need to have a more resilient architecture to handle such devices as well. And another set of challenges that we are facing or we're discovering is, as we launch into newer and newer markets around the globe, there are the device kinds and the platforms are just expanding a lot more. So some of them we can bring into our labs and figure out what to provide, and some of them or most of them we can't. So essentially we need to come up with a more resilient architecture to handle all such devices and providing them still a unique and best playback experience for our live streams.
Okay. And we're getting really close to where we go into questions. If you have any questions, hit the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and pop them in there, and we'll direct those out. We're going to end our last scripted question with everybody's favorite buzzword today, which is AI. The question would be, and we'll start with you, Subhrendu, is do you currently have any AI augmentation to your data? If you do, how are you using it? If not, do you intend on using it?
Yeah, I can't give very specifics, but I think AI is something we are looking into very actively. I would say that there are data analysis that AI can drive in terms of both figuring out when we have like correlating metrics to figuring out where the root cause of something is coming from. That's one. Then there are like user facing features that AI can potentially enable in the live streams. Again, for example, augmenting the streams with audio or text and things like that, that AI can actually help a lot. And those are all things that we are looking into.
I think, yeah, I mean, I would largely agree. Similarly, we are sort of constantly and on ongoing basis evaluating our use of AI, particularly with data. I think where it can really help, to Subhrendu's point, is with that storytelling aspect and translating just a set of numbers into actually this is a potential or likely root cause. But I also think, there are things that we know, and there are things that we don't know. And again, with this huge data set, there are many things that I'm sure we haven't discovered yet that we're constantly looking for, and at the moment doing in either a manual way or automated in some form. But I think really bolstering that with AI to surface things that we know we need to focus on next, or we don't know yet that we need to focus on, is going to be a real driver for us, something that we're really looking into and quite excited about to explore more.
Fantastic. Well, that's the end of our part of the world. Now we got part of the session. We got a couple questions in the chat, or not in the chat, but in the Q&A box. We'll start. Anonymous asks, have you been able to opt, and either of you jump in, whoever wants to start, or if you don't want to say anything, don't say anything. How have you been able to optimize your video start times for different playback scenarios? Can you share an example of each live and VOD playback?
Yeah, I can start. I won't name specific devices in this example, but we in one of our global launches in a market across the globe, we found that specific devices was showing challenges with video start times, and we made very specific like device capability changes to make sure that we can address the video start time on those devices by either giving them different ABR ladders versus also like making them start off at different bit rates to basically lessen the video start time issue. Uh, yeah, so I think that's the crux of it. The other things that like pile on top of that is we have ad delivery on all our platforms, and that just incrementally increases the metrics and the challenges that when you add insertion in the mix, then different devices will react very differently based on whether it's HLS or DAS, and whether you have interstitial or not interstitial. Then how the ads will switch from, say, ads will probably not get DRM'd and the main content is DRM'd. So when you do all those different platforms, especially low end platforms as well as platforms that are not built for streaming, uh, and but are getting used for streaming now, will react in very different ways. So not just for the video startup time as such, but across all those feature sets you need to optimize for very specific devices accordingly.
I think just to add, I think that's the major thing, right? It's responding based on that specific device and the limitations of that device. I think you can also look at what you know about the environment in that moment, and perhaps if you know that you are in favorable network conditions, we can be a bit more aggressive about the ABR, and we can start the playback maybe a bit sooner than we normally would, because we know we have that runway with the high connection speed. So there's things like that I think that you can tweak, and that's both for VOD and for live playback. I think the second thing is really about culture and mentality. And I think when you're building features or adding things to the platform, you need to be thinking about this from the very beginning. You know, finding it out after it's been released is far too late. If you're building a new feature that needs to call an API, we always have that in mind when we're building it, because it's very easy for us to just say, well, we'll just make a call as the player is loading and as playback starts. But actually, that's going to increase video start time. And so we're always being very aggressive about, does this call need to be made while the video is starting? That's really our ethos, is we're doing as little as possible to get the video started. And can we be doing this before, or can we be doing this after? That's always the question that I think, as you're designing and building new features, that's what you should be asking. So that's the second way I think to optimize video start time.
Agreed. Next question is from Matt. Subhrendu mentioned piracy earlier. Are you monitoring your streaming data for signs of pirated streams, and what actions do you take once it is discovered?
Yeah, so I think the short answer is yes, we are monitoring our streaming data for signs of pirated streams. Yes. What actions do you take? I think it's again a sliding scale. I probably won't comment on exactly what actions we take, but as an engineering organization, we basically enable all the sets of actions that could be taken. So right from whether it's a revocation of a device, whether it's blocking of the device, blocking of the user account, all of those are on the table. And then both legal and business basically get together to figure out what's the best course of action for each such unique condition, right? Because detecting a pirated content again is a sliding scale. How bad of an actor that is, yes or no. Whether it's just an user who has been hacked and then you really don't want to revoke that user or block that user, so to speak. So it's a sliding scale, and basically it's all options are on the table and to be taken by legal and business.
I think similarly, you know, we are always monitoring the platform for bad actors. We have many sort of safeguards and mechanisms in place. We take the protection of our content very, very seriously, and you know, we take the relevant action if we find it. But you know, to Subhrendu's point, that is a sliding scale, and it's something that we're always looking at as well.
We've got one gentleman with questions left. I'm trying to figure out how to paraphrase them. Otherwise, we're about ready to wrap up. Okay. Yeah, Steve just answered me. Okay, so that's where we're going to wrap for today. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Steve's got some housekeeping he's got to take care of. Otherwise, thank you, Seb, Sarkar, or speak English. My tongue, you know, 2 hours straight is kind of killing me here with my tongue. But thank everybody. Thanks for joining us, and thank our panelists for a great discussion. Appreciate everybody. And here's Steve.
Yeah, thank you all. And you see you're getting some applause there. It's definitely a great conversation. Thank you so much. And yeah, just to wrap up here, the last thing we need to do is give away our Amazon gift card. Prosper Gehring correctly identified Bouncing with Bud by the amazing Bud Powell. Congratulations, Prosper. You'll be getting an email shortly telling you how to claim your prize. And we will be back at 4 o'clock East Coast time, 1 o'clock Pacific time for Origin to Edge, video caching and content delivery. So we will see you then. Thanks.